Good afternoon, folks, and welcome along to today's webinar. So today's webinar, hosted by Gareth and myself, is all about increasing B2b conversion. And we're going to take you through our webinar for the next 30 minutes or so, allowing some time for question and answers at the end, and a bit of a case study along the way as well. So just by way of introductions, I'll introduce myself first. I'm Andrew McRae. I'm head of delivery here at Fathom. And if you ever want to reach out to me, you can get me on andrew@fathom.pro. And Gareth, my colleague, who's going to be delivering most of the webinar today, he's joining me today as well.
And good afternoon, folks. I'm Gareth, and like Andrew, you'll get me by email at gareth@fathom.pro. And for those of you who tweet or are into Twitter, I'm also at Dunlop71.
Okay, and I'd like you all, if possible, if you're connected to Twitter, to maybe use the following hashtag and our handle at @FathomUX_UX by ways of engaging with the content and sharing the content, please, if you find you'd like to do that. So just by way of an agenda, I'm just going to take you through here briefly what we're going to cover. So first of all, we're just going to cover the differences between business to consumer and business to business in the context of user experience and in the context of conversion online. But of course, these two things share a lot in common in terms of how they want to attract and convert customers as well. So we want to kind of share the commonalities as well as the differences. One of the case studies that we thought we'd share with you today is from one of our clients that we worked with over the last few years, Big Red Cloud. And we want to leave you then with some takeaways, those kind of big takeaways that you want to take back to the office or your studies in terms of how you want to best implement business to business conversion for your business. And then we'll leave 15 minutes, hopefully at the end, for any questions that crop up. And hopefully between myself and Gareth, we can add a bit of value there.
Great, Andrew. Thank you very much. And I'll pick up the baton, and we'll get stuck into some of the material itself. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to think about conversion generally. I wanted to think about what we mean by conversion. I wanted to think about some of the basic frameworks of conversion. And then I wanted to get into some of the key differences between business to consumer and business to business conversion. The reason I wanted to do that is because I think that there has been a lot written and there has been a lot said about the science and the analysis and the discipline of e-commerce conversion and the techniques which are used to drive up conversion, to increase order size, to increase lifetime value of customer, to increase the propensity for an individual user to buy. A lot of those principles are quite well established, and for anyone who's worked in an e-commerce role, they'll be kind of driven into you on a daily or a weekly or a monthly basis. I'm quite aware, though, that some of the thinking of B2B conversion is perhaps less well established or less well pronounced or talked about, and we wanted to explore that. So as Andrew has said, we're going to spend a little bit of time exploring some of the key differences between business to consumer / e-commerce conversion and business to business / lead gen conversion. So let me start with these two brothers here. They are brothers who you may have heard me speak about before. They are the Eisenberg brothers. And these guys really were the pioneers in the mid to late 90s. They were one of the first sets of people to think analytically about the science of conversion. So there's every chance many of you weren't around in the late 90s. You're perhaps too young, but it was an exciting time for the web, but it was also a real unknown time as we all scrambled to understand how it worked and begun to understand or think about how do we design for this thing. And the Eisenberg brothers are one of the first guys who sort of took a step back and described e-commerce in the language of problem solving. Now, of course, in 2022, and from someone like myself, from a colleague Andrew on the call here, who work predominantly in the world of UX, the mindset of problem solving is hardwired into us. It's how we understand our jobs. It's what we do virtually all of the time. We're constantly thinking about the problems that design needs to solve. But back in the mid to late 90s, this sort of mindset wasn't just so available or wasn't just so predominant as it is today. So the Eisenberg brothers wrote a number of really important and seminal books around that time, all of which focused on various flavors of conversion. And I don't have time today to go into exactly what all of those books said, but I want to pull out really what I think is the central tenet of the analysis of conversion, which they produced around the mid to late 1990s. What they argued was this: e-commerce websites have about 6 jobs to solve. When users land on an e-commerce website, they don't consciously think, I'm in phase 1, I'm finding, I'm in phase 3, I'm comparing, I'm in phase 5, I'm doing checkout. The user glides and flows throughout these different states of the journey, and it's the designer's job to make the journey across those different states as seamless as possible. So the customer's not aware of the problems that they're wanting to solve, but at a subconscious level, there are things that they're wanting to do as they go. So very quickly, the first job of an e-commerce website is to let the user feel confident that the thing that they're looking for is probably on the site. In other words, that they are in the right place and that they can confidently move towards the content, the product that they might be looking for. The second job then is to help the user narrow down from all of the products which are on sale on the website to the subset of products that they may be interested in. So it's important that navigation, selection, facets, filters allows the user to hone in on that small subset that they're interested in. Once the user gets that subset, they start to become interested in detail. So if they're thinking that they might buy shirt A or shirt B, they want to know the size, the color, the fit. If they're thinking about phone A or phone B, they want to know the screen size, the battery life, the operating system, the contract, all that good stuff. So around step 3, the user starts to get really interested in detail and in comparison. And it's around that step that if the website has done enough to persuade the user and it's easy enough to buy, they will then make that decision in step 4 to buy. And once the user has made the decision to buy, they are all focused on checkout and they are all focused on fulfillment. And so the job of the e-commerce website provider is, once the user's got to step 4, you want to get them off your site as quickly as you possibly can before they change their mind, before they get distracted, etc. So this gives us a framework to understand B2C conversion. And as I say, I'm leaning here on the work of the Eisenberg brothers. This isn't my genius. It's just a really helpful framework for us. Now, the surprising outcome of the work that the Eisenberg brothers did in the late 1990s was to recognize that when it comes to shopping trolley abandonment, in other words, a user fills up their trolley with products but doesn't buy, 60% of the reasons that users abandon their trolley come from the experience before the trolley itself. And so shopping trolley abandonment is a term we don't hear so much nowadays. We often hear terms like conversion rate or conversion rate optimization. And that's one of the reasons that that's the case is because of that 60% number. 20% of shopping trolley abandonment is to do with the checkout, and 20% of shopping trolley abandonment is to do with fulfillment. So that's where that's the broad framework within which we think about e-commerce conversion. Let's then think about how that applies or contrasts to the world of business to business. So this is a sales and marketing funnel. There are many variations in this funnel which are available, but they are all broadly variations on a theme. This funnel outlines how any organization, B2C or B2B, gets a customer from the stage of not knowing they exist to the stage of being a loyal, repeat, advocating customer. So the first thing the organization has to do is to make the customer aware that they exist. Then they have to make sure that they are relevant when the customer is considering buying from them. They want to make sure that they are relevant and in the moment and persuasive during decision making. They want to convert. And once the customer is converted, they want to make sure that customer buys from them again and again. And it's different from industry to industry, from sector to sector, B2C versus B2B. But it is universal to all organizations. The tactics are different, but the broad framework that they need to move users along that funnel is the same. Now, here's the thing. B2C and e-commerce tends to, when we focus in on the website, it tends to sit predominantly within those decision-making and conversion columns. However, business to business very typically has a role to play right across the piece. It's got a role to play in awareness, a role to play in consideration, and in decision-making, and in conversion, and in advocacy. So the first thing that we observe when it comes to B2B conversion is that B2B websites often have a wider remit than e-commerce websites. E-commerce websites are built for speed. They're built for the transaction. There's a very definite journey through them. Whereas in the world of B2B, what we have to recognize is that it is unlikely, or it's much less likely, that we will get that lead on the first visit. We might get the user from awareness to consideration or from awareness to decision making, but it's much less likely that we will get them over the line in that first visit. There are other dynamics to bear in mind as well, which are relevant to how we think about lead generation. The first is that the more time that is spent on the left-hand side of that column, the more expensive it is to speak to the customer. In other words, let's take something from conversion, such as triggered emails, or let's take something from advocacy, such as social sharing. It's very inexpensive to ask your customer to do those things. But contrast that with TV advertising or press advertising. It's exceptionally expensive to get space in those environments because you're vying for that user's or that customer's attention. So the first thing we observe about the chart is that the more time you spend on the left-hand side of it, the more expensive it is to have the attention of your customer. The second thing which we observe, however, is that the more we move to the right-hand side, the more the customer is in control. So on the left-hand side, let's take something like TV or PR or retargeting. In those environments, you decide when your ad's going to go on the TV. You decide where your billboard's going to go. You decide what press you want to put into the newspapers and magazines in conjunction with the editors. Whereas if you move over to decision-making or conversion and a user is on your website, they will do exactly what they want to do. You have very little influence over what they do when they get there. So in a B2B environment, we often find that a B2B website needs to set its parameters. It needs to define conversion in a slightly different way. And certainly it needs to avoid the temptation to think that we can or should make that killer sale or that killer lead gen on the first visit. All of our experience, when we contrast our B2C versus B2B experiences, tells us that that lead often comes as a result of multiple visits from multiple people. So what that means when we have a look at it and we break it down into the world of B2B is we've got a set of questions which users ask at different phases. And the questions are different in different industries, for different organizations, for different sales processes, for different products, for different services. So they're different. But what this does is it gives us a framework for exploring what those questions are. So here's just some examples of what awareness questions might be. Am I in the right place? What's on offer? Might this company meet my needs? Consideration questions might be, are they a good cultural fit? What's their technical expertise? What experience do they have? Decision-making questions, can I speak to one of their people? What's their support like? When it comes to definite interest, I'd like some case studies or white paper. Data capture comes into play. And then finally, when a qualified lead comes out, that's when the user has decided that they're phoning or emailing. So when we think of B2B conversion, there's a number of things that kind of fall out of this slightly different model when we compare it or contrast it to B2C. The first thing that we observe is there's a constant need for forward momentum. In other words, having established the framework, we need to be clear what questions users are having at different parts of the journey, and we've got to build the online customer journey in such a way that if a user is looking at a set of questions in phase 2 consideration, that they can easily move on. Navigation, calls to action are all built around moving them into decision making, into definite interest, into generating a lead. So the first observation we make is that there's a real need for forward momentum in terms of how we build the information architecture and content design on the site. I think the second thing to acknowledge is that very often when it comes to generating a lead in a business-to-business environment, particularly if you're selling a high-ticket item, there will almost definitely be multiple visits, and there will almost definitely be multiple visits from different people. In other words, what might happen is that perhaps a marketing manager is interested first, does a little bit of digging around, gets some information. That gets you on a short list. That marketing manager shares that with their marketing director. That marketing director then has a look. They themselves then need to share their thoughts with the financial director or the CEO, who also have a look. So you have all these different people who are having a look at a website at different stages of the journey, who will all have their own questions or their own priorities. And again, by just stopping and thinking about who those people might be, considering the role that they might play in the purchasing process, this begins to give us a really good framework for making sure that the different types of users coming to the site along the way have access to the information that they need to make them feel comfortable that you are in a good position to deserve that lead. And the final thing that we observe, and I've put this in the sort of the different column, but I could easily put it in the same column. It's this idea that you don't claim differentiation, you prove it. You avoid your lofty statements, you know, we are the greatest, or we are the longest serving, or we are this, or you replace those with hard facts. You pursue the ability to say things that your competitors can't. The challenge we often set our clients is this: imagine your competitors were to copy your website exactly. Make sure you've got loads of content on your website that they couldn't copy without lying. And in other words, make sure that your content focuses strongly on differentiation and proves it in facts and numbers and case studies and testimonials and so on. So there's a big need to get away from the declaration of grand statements and get towards the implementation and the proof of your differentiation. So those are some of the key differences. B2C, big focus on that single transaction, big focus on a one-off seamless user journey. B2B is a different kind of animal, where we ask different questions and we try to build a different kind of user journey. Let's briefly think about commonalities then as well. And I think there are two commonalities that are probably worth reinforcing. The first one, and I suspect you'd expect me to say this because I'm a UX professional. The first one is to say the big commonality is that we don't lose sight of our primary job as solving problems. So we go through the process of exploring who are the users of this site, who are the stakeholders, who are the influencers, what are their questions, what are their problems, how can we solve those problems, what order can we solve those problems in. That framework for thinking, that way that we go about the design process, that doesn't change whether it's B2B, B2C, or anything in between. And of course, we'll go back to our well rehearsed quote from Albert Einstein: if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. As you will have heard us say many times before, there's something very powerful about exploring the problem, because the better you understand it, the more you've earned the right to come up with a solution. So we'd be big believers in the simple idea that a problem well stated is a problem half solved. For those of you who have a particular interest in UX, we use a series of methods to do that. One of our favorite methods, or one of the most common methods, it's not ours, it was developed by the British Design Council, but one of our favorite methods is what's called the double diamond, where we deliberately separate the problem identification element of the project with the problem solving area of the project. So the left hand side is where we identify the opportunity and we research and analyze and synthesize the problem. And the right hand side is then when we think about what the solutions to that problem might be. The power of the double diamond is a simple one, and it's based on this premise. It's the idea that innovation and strong ideas don't come from moments of inspiration. They don't come from ideas, they come from insights. It's by exploring insights that we get tuned in to what matters to our users, and having got ourselves tuned in, we get really good guidance in terms of how we can best serve them. So the double diamond is a really effective method that we use. But the other thing which is worth mentioning, and which is in common with B2B and B2C, is the importance of persuasion. And we're really well served in this area, because Stanford University has a dedicated technology persuasion lab, and there's just been years and decades of work done around that. It's led by a guy called BJ Fogg. And as well as that, there's been really excellent books written on the science of persuasion, and probably the best known academic who's written on the subject is Robert Cialdini. And so what this then does is it allows us to think from a UX perspective. It allows us to think, how can we get users to flow through a system as effortlessly and easily as possible? How can we build our navigation to make that journey straightforward? But what this persuasion lens allows us to do is it allows us to ask the questions: how could we build content and calls to action into that journey, which will be most persuasive, which will complement the flow and the plumbing that we have put in, if you like, and it will complement that to say the right thing at the right time, to persuade users in the right way, to deal with their blockers, to deal with their concerns, to move them along. And again, there's some really excellent thinking in terms of Persuasion. There's BJ Fogg, who runs the Stanford Persuasive Technology Lab, and as well as that, there's Robert Cialdini. I don't have time to go into Cialdini's principles right now. His original book had 6. It's subsequently been expanded to 7, but I'll just mention what they are and how they are used. And if any of you have used the likes of Booking.com, you'll be very, very familiar with these. Personally, I think Booking.com have gone too far. They got themselves in trouble with the European courts recently for that very reason. But you'll identify some of these on websites that you might use commonly. So firstly, reciprocity. If you give a user something, they are more likely to behave in the way that you would like them. People don't like feeling indebted. So when we get something for free, or we get something which is useful to us, we like to repay that. The second thing is consistency. People like it when they are dealt with in a consistent way. They like it when they feel that they are communicating with an organization or with a brand that is like them. Social proof is one, and we see that everywhere. Authority is another one. People trust authority. That's why thought leadership and content marketing has had such a huge explosion in recent years. It's very persuasive when people arrive in a B2B environment, and it appears not just that this organization provides a service, but has an opinion, has an authoritative voice on what that is. Liking is another one. People prefer others who are similar to them. Scarcity is one. Again, on Booking.com we see only 2 rooms left at this price. On EasyJet.com we see a certain price, only 3 seats left at this price, and so on. So there's a whole range of persuasive principles. And again, what this does is it gives us a framework which allows us to begin to think about how we can pepper in those persuasive elements into the journey. And so where this takes us is to BJ Fogg's well-known principle, or equation, if you might call it, which is B equals MAP. In other words, user behavior is a combination of their motivation, of their ability, and of prompts. And again, I don't have time to go into this now, but what BJ Fogg says is that if a user is prompted to act in a certain way, and it is easy enough to do, and they are motivated enough to do it, then they will act in that way. In other words, the way that we think about conversion is that all of our users are on a spectrum. We've got some users who will love us and absolutely want to buy from us and get in touch, and they will always convert. And you have other users who don't like us and won't ever convert. And along that spectrum, the science of conversion optimization is saying we want to push back on that spectrum as far as we possibly can. In other words, when we think about ability, we want to make it as easy to do as possible to get the greatest number of users over the activation threshold, which means that their motivation doesn't have to be high for us to get them over that threshold. So that's just a few thoughts on persuasion. Persuasion matters in B2B. Persuasion matters in B2C as well. And we find the BJ Fogg model a really helpful one. So to summarize commonalities, the 2 big things I would encourage you to take out is, number 1, we retain really focused, we keep that focus on the importance of problem solving. And number 2, we stand on the shoulders of the likes of Cialdini and Fogg to understand how persuasion wraps around that, to make sure we can say just the right thing, offer just the right prompts, make the flow just easy enough so that user motivation doesn't have to be really high. We're getting users who are slightly less motivated than they previously were. Okay, so that's all the theory stuff done, folks. And I thought it might be useful just to finish our session by looking at a case study. So let me share with you how we deconstructed business-to-business conversion for a client of ours called Big Red Cloud. For those of you who don't know them, they're Dublin-based, but they're all over Ireland. They've got customers in UK as well, and they are an accountancy software platform. And before they were called Big Red Cloud, they were called Big Red Book, and so they've been in the accountancy software market for decades. And obviously, they started off delivering their services through a kind of a client-server technology. But as technology has evolved, they've moved their product onto the cloud, and thus the change of name to Big Red Cloud. So the way that we deconstructed that challenge for them was that we thought we put this simple equation together based on BJ Fogg's, where we said the opportunity for Big Red Cloud's users to progress through the sales cycle is a factor of user intent plus understanding of offering plus clearly expressed differentiation plus sales objections dealt with plus ease of use. And so what you'll see there is a variation of B equals MAP, but with some ingredients peppered in that are specific to Big Red Cloud. So let's begin to think about how we went about delivering that for Big Red Cloud. So their brief to us was straightforward. We want more and warmer inbound inquiries. So let's kick off where you might expect us to kick off, which is to explore problem solving. So we thought about thinking, well, what problems do we need to solve in order to bring about more and warmer inbound inquiries? So let me show you a very quick summary of some of what our research told us around the problems that we needed to solve. So we did some desk research and we looked into analytics. Our analytics were very typical analytics in terms of a B2B organization. They were busier Monday to Friday. They went down a little bit at weekends. And there were a number of areas that we looked where we didn't see any discernible behavior changes, for instance, between users who had access to the free trial and users who didn't. However, we did locate a number of what you might call high intent pages. In other words, what we did was we looked at the buy now page, which was conversion, and we explored the ratio of people who had been before versus were new visitors. And unsurprisingly, we saw that you were twice as likely to convert if you were a return visitor than if you were a first-time visitor. When we looked at the high intent pages, what we could see was that the top two paths for users who converted were features and then pricing, or pricing and then features. So what that's starting to do is it's starting to build up a picture of the behaviors that we can associate with conversion. So we associate a second or multiple visits with conversion. We associate the pricing page and the features page with intent. Our desk research also looked at what competitors were saying, because we were keen to make sure that the messaging, the positioning, was based on something that a competitor couldn't say and was based on something that actually made Big Red Cloud unique. And at the time of this work, and there's been quite a bit of consolidation in this industry, but at the time of this work, there were a lot of software as a service, accountancy, finance solutions in the market. So we had to look at the smaller ones, the larger ones, and we just wanted to pick up a sense of how they positioned themselves and who they were marketing themselves towards. So that started to build up a picture. What we then did was we did some primary research and we spoke to customers of the organization, and we interviewed new customers, we interviewed existing customers, we interviewed people who were customers of Big Red Cloud and customers of Big Red Book. So we got a full flavor of who those customers were. We spoke to 20, and their customers are based at sole traders, freelancers, small businesses, sort of anything between 1 and 20 people. They're in their sweet spot in terms of their target. And our favorite call was someone was in a car, but one guy in particular, a plumber, was under a sink. But here are the patterns that began to emerge. For these customers, simplicity was important. Customers didn't really care about the feature list. They were more interested in the benefits for them. Critically, accountancy buy-in was important. They were heavily guided by their bookkeeper or their accountant. And finally, there was a really excellent sense that support was important and was really strong. So a couple of quotes here. Someone said Sage is too much trouble. Someone said Big Red Cloud is minute, but they liked that it was a compliment. Customers don't care about the feature list. You can see the quote there. Accountancy buy-in is important, and so on. And we'll come back to that accountancy quote. The biggest advantage is that the accountant can log in remotely and sort out any problems. And the reason that was useful for us was because we, as the UX team, we're used to the world of cloud software. So cloud software is cloud software for us. But it was really interesting to learn that for those who are using this software, cloud software was more than just a platform. It was a real benefit to them because they could look after their accounts in conjunction with their accountants. When it came to start to put a little bit of structure in this, where our research took us was this idea that our personas for the system weren't just small business owners. We recognized that personas were Declan and Anne, who are small business owners, but they are also Dennis, who is their bookkeeper. And whilst we've changed their names, we did speak to someone exactly like Dennis, and we spoke to people exactly like Declan and Anne in terms of how they go about running their business. So the research gave us a really clear sense of the context within which they arrived on the site. And we recognized that we needed to be relevant to Declan and Anne, but we also needed to provide converting content for Dennis, because there was no point Declan and Anne being all gung-ho if the bookkeeper was less assured about the product. We also developed a persona for Orla, who was a former Big Red Cloud user, and a persona for Owen, who was an accountant. So when we started to bring this together into what you might call the science of persuasion, or the science of conversion for business to business, we were able to identify some of the key things that we needed to get right if we were going to convert the personas that I've just shared with you. Here's the resistance map, the product consideration resistance map that we developed for the product. You'll see that there were support questions that we needed to answer. Do I need training? What kind of support is available? Will I be able to talk to a person? There was features versus benefits. There was accountancy approved, and there's a little bit of chat about the cloud. So we're beginning to build up a picture of the problems that we need to solve, of the questions that we need answered, of how we can persuade these people that this product is a really suitable product for them. Our research also helped us understand the things which we needed to get right if we were going to persuade someone who was interested in the product to go ahead and do a free trial. And again, you'll see that payment, trial period, security, and required information were some of the key areas there. So having invested all that time in understanding the problem, being on the left-hand side of that double diamond, where that then took us was it took us to the ability to begin to develop some outputs. So our outputs included a content audit of what the old content was structured like, and we benchmarked it red, amber, green against what we knew were user needs. And from that then evolved a new information hierarchy, a new information architecture. You'll see that it was led by benefits, which our users told us was important. Next in the list then was support, which we knew from our users was really well delivered by Big Red Cloud and was really important to them. So there's a big section there. And then third was pricing. Pricing made the cut in there because we knew that pricing was a high intent page. So we wanted to bring to the fore the content that we associated with high intent and that was most persuasive. We then thought about user journeys. We asked, how can we get that user from the home page flowing through the system towards conversion? So we lo-fi designed the home page. We thought about how we can move through the registration flow and the logic of that and asking the right questions in the right order. We thought about just how we wanted to position pricing in such a way that it was clear enough to be unambiguous, but we weren't just getting straight to the numbers. We thought as well about the importance of just the history and the legacy of the company. So we developed a series of lo-fi wireframes. What we then did was we added a layer of fidelity, a layer of detail on top of those. And we began to bring in some of those persuasive elements. So you'll see that the strapline, online accounting made easy, because we knew that was so important to users. We help small businesses with simple everyday accounting tasks, again, reflecting what we knew mattered for users. Big calls to action, try Big Red Cloud. And if you look at the main menu options, you won't be surprised to see that they are benefits, support, and pricing, because that is the content that we knew we needed to lead with based on what we knew from our research with our users. So we added that additional layer of content detail. We began to promote our calls to action, and we thought about how that would look on desktop and on tablet and on mobile. And so where that took us was when we applied that visual layer on top, then we've got all those different elements coming together. We've got the customer journey pieced out. We've got the problem solving thought through. We've got the persuasion thought through. And on top of that, we apply our own principles of interaction design. And we start to create a website that is structured and flows around the needs of users to promote that increased number of leads. It was a great project for us. It was a great project for them. In their case, inbound leads were up by 280% and trial signups were up by 180. Okay, so I'm aware of time, folks. So if you'll just indulge me one final slide, I'll just share a few takeaways to take away back to the office, just to close it off. Number one, you need to support a more considered sales funnel, because users will probably be visiting your site more often and at different stages of the funnel. Number 2, you need to support multiple visits by multiple people. Number 3, unsurprisingly, focus on problem solving. It's not UX if you don't do that. Number 4, focus on using research to understand persuaders and blockers. And then finally, once you've established all of those things, it's at that stage you can build your IA, your content design, and your flow around user needs. Okay, so folks, thank you for indulging me. I've gone a few minutes over there, but I hope that was useful. And we'll maybe move to Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth, and thanks everyone for listening in this afternoon. So we have come to this point for question and answers, and so far we've got 2 questions, and I'll maybe put these to Gareth, and hopefully between the 2 of us we can maybe take turns to give our perspective on it. So the first question comes from Eamon Connolly, and he has asked the question, which well-known B2B websites, in your opinion, have it nailed in terms of persuasion?
Oh, it's a good question, Eamon, and I hesitate to answer it slightly because actually we find, if I can be honest, when we look, I won't name names, but when we look at some of the better known business to business brands, and we look at the large professional services organizations from whom we would expect better, I think the bar is very low. I think they get caught up in their own fame, and they get caught up in their own hubris, and in the absence of problem solving and in the absence of all the stuff we've just talked about, they tend to try and build experiences around video hamburger menus, talking about themselves, and we just get lost. We go in the opposite direction of conversion. I think the ones who often do it well are often the ones that are below the radar. It's the ones who are they're not the multinationals, the big guys. It's the big red clouds of this world. We did a bit of work last year for an organization just outside Dublin called Persuasion. It's often the smaller guys who are doing it well. But Andrew, I'd love your perspective.
Yeah, I think you're right in that perspective, Gareth, in that a lot of the well-established brands, they use their other brands and they use their scale to persuade and convince, which of course will to some extent work for a lot of users, but are they really answering their specific problems through their interface? Probably not. Whereas the smaller organizations, I think, because they have to work harder, tend to come up with real persuasion that maybe ticks some of those boxes that the other big providers aren't thinking about because they're maybe using their scale or capabilities. I do know that I do have a sense though that when we look at B2B software for our organization and some of the online tools we use for research and project management, some of those websites are okay in terms of their kind of persuasion for B2B. So I'm thinking the likes of Asana or Dropbox. They're often kind of like the go-tos for just really good articulation of content, and their design aesthetics are quite strong. But perhaps they don't, because of their scale, like Gareth said, they maybe don't have to work as hard on the specific content or features that some customers are looking for. Okay, so thanks for that, Eamon. Hopefully that helps answer your question. Martin Byrne has asked here, how do we feel about pricing pages withholding details and requiring the prospect to contact the business and submit their details before getting a price?
I'm happy to go first, Andrew, but do you want to go first in this one? Because I went first the last time.
Yeah, I'll go first. I think my perspective on that, Martin, would be the biggest factor as to whether an organization should or could display pricing is down to what their competition does. So you might find that a particular sector has maybe a fair degree of complexity. Perhaps their price ranges vary quite a lot. And as a result, they maybe don't want to publish their pricing either by seeming too low in value or too high. And I think a lot of it's driven by the competitive landscape. So if your peers aren't doing it, you probably won't do it. And if your peers are doing it, then of course you probably should. Otherwise, you maybe feel to be compared like apples for apples with that organization. And B2B as well, like Gareth said, the point at the end towards conversion is usually made up of multiple visits, and usually multiple visits by different people. So you might have a marketer doing some research who then might take it to a middle manager to evaluate, and that middle manager might take that information to the CEO. And the CEO will probably ask, what's this going to cost? And if the question is, oh, we don't know, but the other organizations, they cost X, Y, and Z, then they might be more persuaded to go down the route of knowing what the price is for their further exploration. So that's maybe my perspective on it. Martin and Gareth, I don't know if you share any of that or you have any different views.
No, I'd share it 100%. Andrew, I maybe just have a couple of small things to add, and I almost hesitate to do it because you've sort of answered it comprehensively, but just a couple of reflections. Certainly if you were in the business to business world and it was software or it was online education, then certainly you'd be leaning towards putting actual numbers on a page. I think if you were a keynote speaker, you would want to give people a sense of, like, and you want it to average $2,000 a talk. You really would need to be putting that on there to just set user expectations. So I think there are times where you definitely have to put on pounds and pence. Whether you put on pounds or pence or not, I think you need to allude to, number one, what your pricing model is. So you might display a case study and you might say this was 50 days of work or 100 days of work if you're a professional services business. You would certainly want to make sure that people get a sense of solidity in pricing. So that you have a set of pricing principles, that it's not just made up. So certainly not everybody should be putting pounds and pence on, but if your research tells you that pricing is a question that users have and you don't want to put pounds and pence on a website, then you do want to make commitments around pricing in terms of letting users know what the model is and just alluding to giving some sense of the principles by which price is established.
Yeah, I'd back that up as well, Gareth. That's actually all the questions we've got so far that have been added to the panel. So we will end it there. Just before we go though, I'd love to just say thanks for everyone who tuned in today, or who's watching this back in the recording. We really appreciate you giving up your time to listen to us talk about B2B conversion. There's lots of ways to stay in touch with us at Fathom. So if you want to get more insights, the best way to do that is to subscribe to our newsletter, which is called Immersion. You'll find all the details on our website. Of course, please follow us on Twitter, where we'll be sharing not only the likes of these webinars recorded, but just our views and perspectives on all things UX. And of course, you can read our blog content on our website as well. We're going to be sending a survey out in the coming days, where we'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on today's webinar as well. So thank you very much. And yes, we hope to see you again on a future webinar.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And thanks everyone for joining us. See you next time.